spring is a time for growth, and why can't that also apply to your investments? Well, Jerry Slusowitz from Pacific Financial Planners is going to tell us that it can. Welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Michael, for having me.
And we're talking a little bit about growth. So we spend a lot of time talking about like income and risk and those kind of things. But what about growing your money? What about people who are saying, I want to grow even though I'm maybe getting closer to retirement?
Well, people who are close to retirement or in retirement have to understand that there's two ways to get return. That's really what we're doing. But a lot of people say growth when they really mean return.
Okay.
So I'm an income specialist, all right? And what I've come to understand is that growing your money can come with losses. And sometimes these losses are pretty big. I mean, 2022, the market was down 27% at one point for the S&P, 37% for the NASDAQ. You go back a decade earlier, the S&P fell 50% 2 times in the decade. And so if you have $1 million and you lose $500,000 trying to grow your money twice, or $270,000, a lot of people are uncomfortable with those kind of drawdowns. Where income to get your return, or even quote unquote your growth, is a less risky strategy as you retire, because you can get dividends and interest 5 to even 10% that is more consistent than the volatility of the stock market.
Right.
See, you know, a lot of people just don't understand. One of the biggest mistakes they make is misunderstanding the volatility on the stock market and what that does to your return versus having a true income style to grow your money.
And so there's really like, there's 2 different kinds of strategies, right? So like when somebody looks at the Dow, oh, it's at record high, S&P, why am I not in there? Well, you're also remind folks that, hey, they dipped, it isn't a straight line in that world. And so there is a high risk on that end of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get, you know, potentially, you know, 1 year has a 20-25% return and you don't mind losing half your money in some years, and that's okay for you. Especially if you're drawing income against your investments. Remember, our viewers, most of them, are retired. So what they give up? Their paycheck. So how are they going to replace it? Well, that's, you know, that's what they've saved all this money for.
Right.
So if they have consistent income and less exposure to the ups and downs of the stock market, it's a much better method for our viewers to really get the return, because you know, it's not the end game that matters. Is how you get there sometimes, because people panic and they'll sell during those big drops and take these big losses.
Okay. Now you talk sometimes about the psychology of investing. What do you mean by that psychology? Is it just a mindset kind of thing?
Yeah, and the mindset is this, is that most of us, when we start investing, and all our viewers out there, et cetera, we start investing, you know, in our 20s, 30s, 40s, in what, a retirement plan, or IRA, or 401k,
Right.
you know, now they have Roths and those type of things. And you're saving, and what are you trying to do? Grow your money for retirement. You see all the commercials.
Right.
Grow your money, follow the green line, it's going up and up and up and up. And so that's the, you know, so-called the girl you brought to the dance. So, you know, when people say, hey, look, I've saved $1 million through this strategy, this is really cool. I'm going to just stick with it in retirement because it got me here over the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
The problem with that is that when you're younger and you're dollar cost averaging in through those lows, when the market drops 50% and you buy more, you're buying twice as many shares. But when you retire, if you need to draw income off there, then you're selling when the market's down those 50 shares, so 50%. So if dollar cost averaging is good, growing your money, reverse dollar cost averaging must be bad, and I can mathematically show that to you.
Okay, so when we're taking that transition, when you're telling folks, hey, it's time to stop doing it this way, and time to start going this way, what are some of like the safe strategies that you're talking about here?
Well, again, I do this thing called the world of income as an income specialist, and you know, you start with banks, bonds, and insurance companies. Right now, banks, CDs, you can get about 5%, no risk. Bonds, treasuries, the same thing. You can get a little over 5%, state tax free, 0 risk. And insurance companies, you know, they offer insured products as well that offer 5.5%, no risk, 0. And so, you know, if you need let's say you've got $1 million, and now you need $50,000 to supplement any pensions or Social Security you might have. If you took that through the stock market, and let's say the stock market between 2000 and 2019 returned about 6.7%, and you were drawing off 5% per year, seems like nothing. What's wrong with that, right?
Right,
You're growing
there
at
we go.
6.7.
Easy money.
You're going to have more money at the end. Because of sequence of returns, Michael, between 2000 and 2003, when the market dropped in half, your million dropped to $500,000. But if you needed $50,000 a year, you only had 350,000.
Right.
And then when it doubled between 2003 to 2007, that 350 grew to 700,000. But over those 4 years, you took off another 200,000. Now you're only at $500,000.
Right.
Today, all those years later, with a 6.7% average return in the stock market and only drawing off 5%, you only have a couple 100,000 left. Or if you had that same $1 million and you did one of these, banks, bonds, insurance company deals, you'd have all your money plus $50,000 a year. You see, that's the psychology that needs to shift when you become retired to a more conservative strategy.
You don't want to treat that. You want to treat that like a grant, or like an endowment. It's just sitting there. You don't touch it. You don't take the principal. You want to just take the income and the interest. Kind of thing, right?
I've used this on this program before, but it's kind of like having a chicken farm, and you like chickens and you like eggs. But if you can eat the eggs and live off of that's the interest income, and have just as many chickens, you're never going to run out of food.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing. If you have $1 million, you put it in the stock market, you potentially can cause yourself to run out of money depending on the sequence of returns. If you invested at the beginning of 2003 when the market went up right away, you'd be okay. But we can't predict the future of what the next sequence of return is. Look, we've been up since 2009 to today a dramatic amount. So if you really are optimistic, oh yeah, no, the market's going to double again, well, okay, maybe you could stick with your growth strategy. But if you're not uncertain, you have to take a more certain, predictable strategy, which is getting interest and dividends, which are predictable.
Right. And like you said, some of those interests come from state bonds, and there's no state tax on that, right? That's one of the bonus and perks of investing in those areas too, right?
Yeah, if you use actually California bonds called municipal bonds, you get state and federal tax free.
Oh, really? Okay.
So those are good. But if you use
So
the
that's
federal
part of
bonds,
that has to be part of the calculus when you take that out. It's like, hey, you're maybe not getting the biggest return, but you're not paying any taxes, so the actual return is higher than maybe some other opportunities.
Absolutely. Looking at taxes is also a very, very important. Like people go, where should I draw from first? And again, I sit down with people all the time. It almost seems counterintuitive, but sometimes I tell people to draw out of their IRA, the retirement account, even though they're not 73. And they say, well, why? I go, well, you're in a low tax bracket now. And this would be a good time to reduce that, so when you hit the required minimum distributions at 73, you don't have as much of a hit then. It's the best time to control taxes is when you retire and prior to taking the required minimum distributions at 73.
Okay.
You've got to control your taxes, so it's a great point, Michael.
You also say some state that seniors can create their own pensions. How do you kind of do that? Like pensions were those golden tickets when you get with a company for many decades, or a state pension from a teachers union, that kind of thing. People don't really have those anymore. How do you say you create that de facto pension?
Right. It used to be the three-legged stool. You're saving Social Security and a pension. But very, very few people, especially going forward, have pensions. So that's a two-legged stool that's going to fall over. So if you have some funds, and many people have way too much money in the stock market. I mean, most people I sit down with here from the village, they have way too much risk. Most people. Not everybody, but a lot of them. And they could take a chunk of that money, reduce market exposure, and put it into an investment that will pay them 8, 9, even 10% income on their money for life. So let's say it's 10%. You put in $1 million, you're getting $100,000 a year income, and 10 years goes by, you should be out of money. If you live 20, 25, 30 years, you can still get that income coming in for life. It's creating your own pension. A lot of people say, geez, I don't like insured investments, things called annuities. Well, anyone who has a pension, they have an annuity. Most, ask anybody, do you like your pension? Everybody likes their pension. So if you don't have one and you have some assets, you can reposition the assets and create your own pension. I could show you how.
Okay, well, you can show us how. And speaking of that, how can you show us how? Thursday, you got your event coming up over the Clubhouse 7, I believe. And tell us a little bit more. You're going to talk about there this and a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's a group discussion. I obviously lead it, and I'll go through various things. Yeah. But it's a forum, and so there's anywhere between 35 and 60 people show up. You don't have to participate. You don't have to give your name. You don't have to say anything. You can learn, but if you have questions, you can ask. If you've got comments about what you're doing to help the group, it's a group discussion. It's very good, and this is kind of the things we're going to talk about.
Yeah, but you take much deeper dives in this area and show us how
I'll
that works.
show you how that that money on the sequence of return, needing income, how detrimental it was to do reverse dollar cost average.
Let me write this down. I might need to show up to one of these things.
Show up, everybody, you'd be the hero. They'd be asking for your autograph.
Oh my goodness, so now it's too much. All right, you talked me out of it. Pacific Financial Planners, Jerry Slusowicz, thank you so much for joining us, as always.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me.
All right, when we come back, we'll be talking to folks from Reform Temple of Laguna Woods. Stay with us.